The mud still clung to her boots when they formed the circle around her car. Elena Martinez had barely stepped out of her mitted Honda when the first stone hit her windshield. The crack spider-webbed across the glass, like a warning she couldn't ignore. 6 men stood in the fading twilight of Millbrook's Main Street, their faces hard as the mountains that surrounded this forgotten town. "You need to leave," said the tall one with the sheriff's badge. His voice carried the weight of authority and something darker. "Tonight." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, but she kept her voice steady. "I have every right to be here. I inherited my grandmother's house." "Your grandmother was a witch," spat another man, tobacco staining his teeth brown. "And we don't want her kind back in our town." The word hit her like a physical blow. Elena had heard the whispers about Abuela Rosa, the stories of herbs and healing that had followed her family for generations. But she'd never imagined it would follow her here, to this place where her grandmother had lived quietly for 30 years. "I'm not leaving," she said, though her voice cracked. "I have nowhere else to go." The sheriff stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun. "Then we'll make sure you do." That's when she saw him. He stood apart from the group, leaning against the doorframe of the old hardware store. Tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. While the others glared at her with open hostility, his gaze was different, assessing, careful, but not cruel. "Leave her alone, Marcus," the quiet man said, his voice low but carrying across the street. The sheriff turned, his face twisting with irritation. "Stay out of this, Caleb. This doesn't concern you." "It does now." Caleb pushed off from the doorframe and walked toward them, his movements fluid and deliberate. Elena noticed the way the other men shifted, uneasy. "The woman has rights, legal ones. She's trouble," Marcus insisted, "just like her grandmother was." "Rosa Martinez helped more people in this town than you ever have," Caleb replied quietly. "She delivered your son when Doc Peterson was drunk. She saved your wife's life when she had pneumonia." The sheriff's face flushed red. That was different. No, it wasn't. Caleb's eyes found Elena's, and she felt something shift inside her chest. "She belongs here as much as anyone." The crowd began to murmur, some nodding reluctantly. Elena realized that this quiet man held more sway than she'd initially thought. But Marcus wasn't finished. "If she stays, there'll be consequences," he warned. "For everyone." Caleb stepped closer to Elena, close enough that she could smell sawdust and something clean like mountain air. "Then she stays with me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know this man, didn't understand why he was helping her. But in that moment, he was the only thing standing between her and the growing darkness of the mob's anger. "You sure about this, Caleb?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I've never been more sure of anything." The silence stretched between them like a bridge Elena wasn't sure she could cross. Caleb's truck sat in the driveway of what had once been her grandmother's house. Now legally hers, but feeling foreign under the weight of the town's hostility. He'd followed her here after the confrontation, not speaking, just ensuring she made it safely. Now he stood on the porch, his hands tucked deep in his jacket pockets, watching her struggle with the rusted lock. "Here," he said quietly, reaching into his pocket. "Rosa gave me a spare key years ago. For emergencies." Elena paused, studying his face in the dim porch light. "You knew my grandmother well." "Well enough." He handed her the key, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. She was a good woman, misunderstood, but good. The lock turned easily, and the door swung open to reveal a house frozen in time. Elena stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and something indefinable that had always been uniquely Abuela Rosa. Caleb hesitated at the threshold. "You can come in," Elena said, surprised by her own boldness. "I think I owe you an explanation about why I'm here." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." Elena moved through the small living room, her fingers trailing over surfaces covered in dust and memories. "I lost my job 3 months ago. My apartment, my savings, everything. When the lawyer called about the inheritance, it felt like a sign." Caleb watched her carefully. "What kind of job?" "I was a nurse. Pediatric ICU." The words came out rougher than she intended. "I whistle blew on a doctor who was falsifying records. The hospital chose to protect him instead of the children." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. "That took courage." "It took stupidity," Elena corrected, sinking onto her grandmother's old couch. "I thought doing the right thing would matter. I was wrong." "No," Caleb said firmly. "You were right. The world just has a way of punishing people who try to do good. Alina looked at him properly for the first time, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to hold depths she couldn't fathom. Why did you help me today? You don't know me. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving around the room. I knew your grandmother. She helped me when no one else would. When I was broken. Broken how? His jaw tightened. I came back from Afghanistan, different, couldn't sleep, couldn't be around people. The nightmares were so bad, I was drinking myself to death. Rosa found me passed out in the woods behind her house one night. She could have called the sheriff, had me arrested for trespassing. Instead, she brought me inside, made me tea, and sat with me until morning. Alina felt her heart constrict. What did she do? She listened. Every night for months, she'd sit with me while I fought the demons. She never judged, never tried to fix me. Just stayed. His voice grew softer. She saved my life. And now you're saving mine, Alina whispered. I'm trying to. Caleb met her eyes. But I need you to understand something. This town, it's not just about superstition. There are people here who profit from fear, who use it to control others. Your grandmother threatened that control. How she saw through the lies. She knew which families were being abused, which children were being hurt, which women were being silenced. She held them quietly, without fanfare. But her very existence reminded people that there were alternatives to the way things had always been done. Alina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And now they think I'm the same threat. Are you? Caleb asked. And there was something hopeful in his voice. Alina thought about the children she'd fought to protect. The system she'd challenged. The price she'd paid for speaking truth. I don't know. But I won't be driven away by fear. Good. Caleb stood, moving toward the door. I'll be back tomorrow. We need to talk about what happens next. Caleb, Alina called as he reached for the handle. What you said out there about me staying with you. Did you mean it? He turned back, his dark eyes serious. I meant every word. But Alina, he paused, as if weighing his words carefully. If you stay, if you fight this, it's going to get worse before it gets better. They'll come for both of us. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to give you a choice, he said quietly. Your grandmother never had one. But you do. Alina stood, meeting his gaze across the small room. Then I choose to stay. Something flashed across his face, relief, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. Then we'll face whatever comes together. The rocks started flying at dawn. Alina jerked awake to the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen. She stumbled from her grandmother's bed, her heart pounding as another stone crashed through the living room window. Through the broken glass, she could see shapes moving in the gray morning light. Teenagers, she realized, throwing stones and bottles at the house. Which, one of them shouted, "Get out of our town." Alina grabbed her phone to call the police, then remembered Sheriff Marcus's face from the night before. Instead, she dialed the number Caleb had given her. He answered on the first ring. Alina, they're throwing rocks at the house, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Kids, I think. I'm on my way. Stay inside. The line went dead. Alina pressed herself against the wall, listening to the continued assault on her grandmother's house. 3 more windows broke before she heard Caleb's truck roar into the driveway. Hey, his voice boomed across the yard. Back off. Now. The throwing stopped. Alina peered through the broken window to see Caleb standing in front of his truck, his hands at his sides, but his posture radiating controlled anger. The teenagers, 6 of them, none older than 17, shuffled backward, but didn't flee. Mr. Stone, one of them called out, a lanky boy with defiant eyes. You shouldn't be protecting her. My dad says. I don't care what your dad says. Tommy, Caleb interrupted. This is private property, and you're destroying it. Go home. She's a witch, just like her grandmother was. Another boy insisted. My mom says she put a curse on the Henderson's baby. Elena's blood ran cold. She'd heard about the Henderson infant born with a heart defect that required surgery. The idea that anyone would blame her grandmother for a medical condition was absurd, but she could see the fear in the teenagers' faces. Your mom is wrong, Caleb said firmly. Rosa Martinez was a healer, not a curse maker. She helped deliver half the babies in this town. Then why did she live alone? Tommy challenged. Why didn't she have any friends? Because people were afraid of what they didn't understand, Caleb replied. Just like you are now. Alina couldn't stand it anymore. She opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, glass crunching under her feet. The teenagers took a collective step back, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. I'm not a witch, she said clearly. I'm a nurse. I came here because I inherited my grandmother's house, and I have nowhere else to go. Prove it, Tommy said, his voice cracking slightly. Alina reached into her pocket and pulled out her nursing license and hospital ID badge. I worked in pediatric intensive care. I took care of sick children. Just like my grandmother took care of sick people here. Then, why don't you look normal? A girl with stringy blonde hair asked. Why do you have those weird eyes? Alina touched her face self-consciously. She'd inherited her grandmother's unusual violet eyes, a genetic quirk that had made her stand out her entire life. They're just eyes. The same eyes my grandmother had. Which eyes? The girl whispered. No, Caleb said firmly. Beautiful eyes. Different doesn't mean dangerous. Alina felt heat rise in her cheeks. The teenagers were looking between her and Caleb with new interest. The hostility beginning to give way to teenage curiosity about the obvious tension between the adults. Look, Alina said, stepping closer to the edge of the porch. I know you're scared. I know the stories about my grandmother seem frightening. But I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because I need a place to heal, just like everyone else. Heal from what? Tommy asked, his aggression softening slightly. Alina hesitated, then decided on honesty. I lost everything trying to protect children who were being hurt. I stood up to people who were more powerful than me, and I lost. I came here hoping to start over. The teenagers exchanged glances. The girl with blonde hair stepped forward. My little brother was born with a cleft palate. The doctors said he'd need surgery, but we couldn't afford it. Then Mrs. Martinez came to our house with herbs and she made him better. Mom says it was impossible, but he's fine now. That's impossible, Tommy insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Alina asked gently. I've seen things in hospitals that medical science can't explain. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected places. Caleb moved closer to the porch, his eyes never leaving Alina's face. Your grandmother helped my family too, he said quietly. She sat with my mother when she was dying, made the pain easier, never asked for anything in return. Alina felt tears prick her eyes. This was the first time anyone had spoken about her grandmother with anything other than fear or suspicion. Maybe, Tommy said reluctantly, maybe we should give her a chance. My dad won't like it, another boy warned. Then don't tell him, the blonde girl said with teenage defiance. Adults don't know everything. Alina watched a group of teenagers walk away. Their stone-throwing replaced by whispered conversations and curious glances back at the house. When they were gone, she turned to Caleb. Thank you, she said simply. They'll be back, he warned, and next time, it might not be just teenagers. Alina nodded, surveying the damage to the house. I'll clean up the glass. We'll clean up the glass, Caleb corrected. Together, as they worked side by side, sweeping up broken glass and boarding up windows, Alina found herself stealing glances at this quiet man who'd chosen to stand beside her. She still didn't understand why he'd helped her, but she was beginning to understand that his loyalty, once given, was unshakable. Caleb, she said as they fitted plywood over the kitchen window. What happens when they come for you too? He paused, his hammer suspended mid-swing. Then we'll face that together too. The fire started at midnight. Alina woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the orange glow dancing across her bedroom wall. She stumbled to the window and saw flames licking at the wooden fence surrounding her grandmother's garden. In the flickering light, she could make out figures moving in the shadows, adults this time, not teenagers. She grabbed her phone and called Caleb, then rushed outside with the garden hose. The fire was spreading fast, consuming the carefully tended herbs and flowers that had been her grandmother's pride. Alina aimed the hose at the flames, but the water pressure was too weak. It's no use, a voice said behind her. Alina spun around, to find Sheriff Marcus standing at the edge of her property, his arms crossed, watching the fire with satisfaction. You could have prevented this, by understanding your place. Marcus stepped closer, his badge gleaming in the firelight. Your grandmother knew her place. She kept quiet, stayed out of sight. But you, you're making waves. I'm just trying to live my life. In a town that doesn't want you. Marcus's voice was cold. This is just the beginning, Alina. Next time, it might be the house that burns. Alina heard the roar of Caleb's truck in the distance. Are you threatening me, Sheriff? I'm warning you. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There are forces in this town bigger than you understand. People who won't hesitate to protect their interests. Caleb's truck skidded to a stop, and he jumped out with a fire extinguisher. He took one look at the burning garden and the sheriff's smug expression, and his jaw tightened. Convenient timing, Marcus, Caleb said, aiming the extinguisher at the flames. Fire starts and you're here to watch. I was responding to a call. Marcus replied smoothly. Someone reported suspicious activity. Suspicious activity like arson. Marcus shrugged. Could be kids playing with matches. Could be an electrical problem. Hard to say. Elena watched the two men face off, feeling the weight of history between them. There was something deeper here. Something personal that went beyond her presence in town. Marcus, Caleb said quietly. Walk away, while you still can. Is that a threat? It's advice. Caleb's voice was steady, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. From someone who knows your secrets. The sheriff's composure cracked for just a moment. Fear flickering across his features. You wouldn't dare. Try me. The two men stared at each other across the smoldering garden. Elena felt like she was watching a chess game where she didn't know the rules. Finally, Marcus backed down. This isn't over, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The town council meets tomorrow night. We'll be discussing the problem of unwanted residents. After Marcus left, Elena and Caleb finished extinguishing the fire. The garden was ruined, months of careful tending reduced to ash and blackened stems. Elena knelt among the ruins, her hands trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Abuela. Caleb knelt beside her. It's not your fault, isn't it? Elena looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should just leave. No, Caleb's voice was firm. That's what they want. That's what they've always wanted, to drive out anyone who questions their authority. What secrets? Elena asked suddenly. What secrets do you know about Marcus? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists. Marcus has been covering up domestic violence cases for years, taking bribes to look the other way. Your grandmother documented it all. Elena's breath caught. How do you know? Because she showed me. Before she died, she gave me a box of evidence. Letters, photographs, medical records. She was planning to expose him, but she got sick before she could act. And you've just been sitting on this information. I've been waiting for the right moment. Caleb met her eyes. For someone brave enough to stand up to him. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. You think I'm that person? I think you're exactly that person. Caleb stood, extending his hand to help her up. You stood up to powerful people before. You can do it again. And if I refuse, then Marcus wins. The abuse continues. The fear continues. And eventually, he'll drive you out anyway. Elena looked at the ruins of her grandmother's garden, then at Caleb's outstretched hand. She thought about the children she'd failed to protect, the system she'd tried to change, the price she'd paid for speaking truth to power. Where's the evidence? She asked, taking his hand. Safe place. But Elena, he pulled her to her feet, his grip warm and steady. If we do this, there's no going back. They'll come for us with everything they have. They're already coming for us, Elena pointed out. At least this way, we're fighting back. Caleb studied her face in the dying light of the fire. You sure about this? Elena thought about her grandmother, living alone for 30 years, hiding the truth about the corruption in her town. She thought about the women and children who were suffering while Marcus looked the other way. She thought about the teenagers who'd thrown rocks at her house, raised to believe that fear was stronger than truth. I'm sure, she said firmly. Show me the evidence. As they walked toward Caleb's truck, Elena felt something shift inside her. The scared, broken woman who'd arrived in Millbrook was disappearing, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who'd inherited more than just her grandmother's house. Someone who'd inherited her grandmother's courage. The cabin sat deep in the woods, hidden from the road by a stand of ancient pines. Elena followed Caleb up the narrow path, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She'd agreed to see the evidence, but now that the moment had arrived, she wondered if she was strong enough to handle whatever her grandmother had uncovered. I built this place after I came back from Afghanistan, Caleb explained as they reached the small log structure. Somewhere I could go when the world felt too loud. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out into the forest. Elena could see why Caleb had chosen this place. Felt like a sanctuary, removed from the complications and dangers of the outside world. The box is in the bedroom, Caleb said, but he hesitated before moving. Elena, once you see this, you can't unsee it. Your grandmother carried this burden for years. Are you sure you want to carry it too? I'm sure, Elena said. though her voice wavered slightly. Caleb disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a wooden box. Old and worn, with Rosa Martinez's initials carved into the lid. He set it on the kitchen table and stepped back. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to someone who would use it wisely," he said quietly. "Someone who wouldn't be afraid to speak for those who can't speak for themselves." Alina lifted the lid with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of photographs, documents, and handwritten notes in her grandmother's careful script. The first photograph made her stomach turn. A woman's face, bruised and swollen, her eyes filled with terror. "Maria Santos," Caleb said, softly. "Marcus's wife." Alina picked up the photograph, her hands shaking. Beneath it was a medical report documenting broken ribs, a concussion, and multiple contusions. The date was from 2 years ago. "She came to your grandmother for help," Caleb continued. "Rosa treated her injuries and documented everything. But when Maria tried to file a report, Marcus buried it." Alina continued through the evidence, each piece more damning than the last. There were photographs of children with injuries that were clearly non-accidental, medical records that had been altered, and witness statements that had been suppressed. All of it pointed to a systematic cover-up orchestrated by Sheriff Marcus and his allies. "How many people knew about this?" Alina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your grandmother suspected, but she couldn't prove it. She was just one elderly woman against the entire power structure of the town." Caleb sat down across from her, but she was patient. She gathered evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to act. And she never got that moment. No, she got sick too quickly. The cancer took her before she could expose the truth. Alina found a letter in her grandmother's handwriting, dated just weeks before her death. She read it aloud, "To whoever inherits this burden. The truth is a dangerous thing in a town built on lies. But silence is more dangerous still. I have documented what I could, but I could not act. Perhaps you will be braver than I was. Perhaps you will speak for those who cannot speak. Remember, Mia, that courage is not the absence of fear, it is action in spite of fear." Alina felt tears streaming down her face. She knew someone would come. She hoped, Caleb corrected. She hoped you would be strong enough to finish what she started. Alina looked at the evidence spread across the table. Dozens of lives destroyed, children hurt, women silenced. The scope of the corruption was staggering. "What's the plan?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "We take this to the state police, to the FBI if necessary. We bypassed Marcus entirely. And in the meantime, we prepare for war," Caleb said grimly. "Because once we make this public, they'll do everything in their power to stop us." Alina stood and walked to the window, looking out into the dark forest. "They're already trying to stop us. The rocks, the fire, it's just going to get worse." "Probably," Caleb joined her at the window. "But Alina, you have to understand, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about every woman who's been beaten, every child who's been hurt, every person who's been silenced. Your grandmother couldn't speak for them, but you can." Alina turned to face him, studying his face in the dim light. "Why are you doing this? Really? It's not just about owing my grandmother a debt." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be broken and have no one believe you. I know what it's like to be silenced by people who are supposed to protect you." "Is that what happened to you? In the military?" "Not in the military. After." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I tried to report what I saw over there. War crimes. Civilian casualties that were covered up. When I came home, I was so messed up I could barely function. But I tried to tell the truth anyway. What happened? They destroyed me. Discredited me. Made me look like a crazy veteran who couldn't tell reality from delusion." Caleb's voice was bitter. "I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my faith. In the system. I came here to hide, to disappear. But you didn't disappear. No, your grandmother wouldn't let me." Caleb managed a small smile. "She said hiding from the truth doesn't make it go away. It just makes it stronger." Alina felt something shift between them, a deeper understanding. They were both wounded warriors, both casualties of systems that punish truth tellers, but, together, they might be strong enough to fight back. "Okay," she said finally. "We do this. We expose them all. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Alina picked up one of the photographs, a young girl with a black eye and a broken arm. "How do we start?" "We start by making copies of everything. Multiple copies, stored in different locations. Then we reach out to contacts I still have in federal law enforcement." Caleb began gathering the evidence. "And we pray we live long enough to see justice done." As they worked through the night, copying documents and organizing evidence, Elena felt her grandmother's presence in the room. Rosa Martinez had lived alone, died alone, but her legacy would not be silence. Her granddaughter would speak the truth. She'd been too afraid to voice. The question was whether either of them would survive the telling. The first ally came from an unexpected source. Elena was replacing the broken windows in her grandmother's house when she heard the tentative knock on the door. She opened it to find the blonde teenager from the rock-throwing incident, shifting nervously on the porch. "I'm sorry to bother you," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Katie Morrison. I was here the other day with the others." "I remember." Elena stepped aside. "Come in." Katie entered hesitantly, her eyes darting around the room. "I heard about the fire." "I'm sorry, thank you." Elena gestured to the couch. "Can I get you something? Water, tea?" "No, thank you." Katie perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I came because ... because I need to tell you something. About my family." Elena sat down across from her, keeping her voice gentle. "What is it, my stepfather?" Katie began, then stopped. Her eyes filled with tears. "He hits my mom. He hits me too, sometimes. When he's drinking." Elena felt her heart contract. "Katie, I'm so sorry. My mom tried to report it once. She went to Sheriff Marcus, showed him the bruises. But Marcus said there wasn't enough evidence. Said it was probably just clumsiness." Katie's voice grew stronger, fueled by anger. "Then he told my stepfather that my mom had been making up stories." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "What happened then?" "My stepfather beat her so bad she couldn't walk for a week. And Marcus ... Marcus acted like nothing had happened." Katie wiped her eyes. "That's when I started listening to the adults talk. Really listening. And I realized that lots of families have the same problem." "How many families?" "Too many." Katie reached into her backpack and pulled out a small notebook. "I've been writing down names. People I know who are being hurt. People who tried to get help and were ignored." Elena took the notebook, her hands trembling. Inside were dozens of names, addresses, and brief descriptions of abuse that had been covered up or ignored. The scope of the corruption was even worse than she'd imagined. "Katie, this is incredible. But it's also dangerous. If the wrong people find out you have this..." "I know." Katie's chin lifted defiantly. "But I can't keep quiet anymore. My little brother is starting to flinch when men raise their voices. He's 5 years old, and he's already learning to be afraid." Elena looked at this brave teenager and saw herself at that age determined to fight injustice, naive about the cost of speaking truth. "What do you want me to do with this information?" "I want you to use it. Everyone knows you're fighting Sheriff Marcus. Tommy's older brother works at the hardware store, and he heard Mr. Stone talking about evidence and federal agents." Katie leaned forward. "I want to help." "Katie, you could get hurt. Your family could get hurt. We're already getting hurt." Katie's voice was firm. "But now we might have a chance to stop it." Elena studied the teenager's face, seeing the determination. "There, have you talked to your mother about this?" "She's too scared. But there are other women who aren't." Katie pulled out another piece of paper. "I've been talking to some of the older kids, the ones who've graduated. They have stories too. And some of their mums are ready to talk." Elena felt a spark of hope. "How many?" "Maybe a dozen. Maybe more if they know they're not alone." "Katie, what you're proposing, it's going to change everything. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'm sure." Katie stood, her young face set with resolve. "Mrs. Martinez, your grandmother helped my family once. When my little brother was born early, she came to our house every day for a month. She never asked for anything, never told anyone about the bruises on my mum's face. She just helped." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know about how much good she did. But she did it quietly, secretly, because she was afraid of what would happen if she spoke up." Katie moved toward the door. "But you're not afraid, are you?" "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "But I'm going to do it anyway." "Good." Katie smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Because we're going to help you." After Katie left, Elena called Caleb. "We need to meet. We have allies." "What kind of allies?" "The kind that Sheriff Marcus never saw coming." That evening, Elena and Caleb met with Katie and 3 other teenagers at the cabin. The young people brought stories that made Elena's blood run cold: systematic abuse, cover-ups, and a network of corruption that reached far beyond anything her grandmother had documented. "The thing is," explained Jake, whose father had been beating his mother for years, "the adults are all too scared to talk. But we kids ... we see everything. We know everything. And we're not afraid anymore. You should be afraid, Caleb said quietly. These people don't play games, neither do we, Katie replied. We've been living with this our whole lives. We know how to be careful. Alina looked around the circle of young faces, seeing courage that put most adults to shame. What are you proposing? We gather more evidence. We get more people to talk. And we help you build a case so strong that even the FBI can't ignore it. Katie's eyes were bright with determination. We become the voices that our parents couldn't be. And if they come after you, then we stick together, Jake said simply. There's strength in numbers. As Alina listened to these teenagers plan their rebellion against a corrupt system, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. They were young, they were brave, and they were angry enough to fight back. But more importantly, they were willing to trust her with their truth. Okay, Alina said finally. We do this together, but we do it smart, and we do it safe. Agreed, Katie said, and the others nodded as they planned their next moves. Alina realized that her grandmother's legacy wasn't just the evidence she'd left behind. It was the community of people she'd helped, the lives she'd touched, the courage she'd inspired in others. Rosa Martinez had planted seeds of resistance in the most unlikely places. Now it was time for those seeds to grow into something strong enough to change everything. The town council meeting was packed beyond capacity. Alina stood at the back of the room, her hands trembling as she watched the faces of Millbrook's most powerful citizens. Sheriff Marcus sat at the head table, his expression smug and confident. Beside him were Mayor Thompson, Judge Harrison, and several other men Alina didn't recognize but whose expensive suits and cold eyes marked them as important. The purpose of tonight's meeting, Mayor Thompson announced, is to discuss the recent disturbances in our community and their connection to certain undesirable elements. Alina felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She'd expected this, but the weight of their collective hostility was almost overwhelming. Then she felt a warm hand on her shoulder. Caleb had arrived, and with him were Katie and several other teenagers. We're here, Katie whispered, her voice steady despite her youth. Alina took a deep breath, drawing strength from their presence. She'd spent the past week gathering allies, and now she could see them scattered throughout the room, women who'd been silent for years, teenagers who'd witnessed too much, and a few brave men who were tired of looking the other way. As I was saying, Mayor Thompson continued, we have a problem. Property damage, disturbing the peace, and what I can only describe as a general disruption of our community's harmony. Harmony. The voice came from the middle of the room. Alina turned to see Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and determined eyes. Is that what you call it when children show up to school with bruises and teachers are told to ignore them? A murmur ran through the crowd. Sheriff Marcus leaned forward. Mrs. Chen, that's a very serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. Sarah stood, her voice growing stronger. My daughter teaches at the elementary school. She's filed report after report about suspected abuse, and every one of them has disappeared into your office. Sheriff. Now see here, Marcus began, but another voice cut him off. She's right. This came from Dr. Patricia Williams, the town's only pediatrician. I've documented dozens of cases of suspected child abuse over the years. I've followed protocol, reported to the proper authorities, and nothing has ever been done. Alina felt her heart racing. This was at the moment they'd been building toward. But it was happening faster than she'd expected, and she could see the panic beginning to show on the faces of the men at the head table. This is highly irregular, Judge Harrison said, his voice booming over the growing murmur of voices. This meeting is about the recent disturbances, not wild accusations. They're not wild accusations. Alina stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. They're documented facts. The room fell silent. Sheriff Marcus's face had gone pale, and Alina could see the fear in his eyes. He knew what was coming. Ladies and gentlemen, Alina continued, walking toward the front of the room. My name is Alina Martinez. I'm Rosa Martinez's granddaughter, and I'm here to tell you that my grandmother didn't die in vain. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. For years, my grandmother documented a systematic pattern of abuse and corruption in this town. She recorded evidence of domestic violence cases that were buried, child abuse reports that were ignored, and a network of powerful men who protected each other at the expense of the innocent. This is preposterous. Mayor Thompson spluttered. Guards, remove this woman. There are no guards, Caleb said quietly, stepping up beside Alina, and there's no running from the truth anymore. Alina opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph, Maria Santos's battered face. She held it up so the entire room could see. "This is Maria Santos," Alina announced. "Sheriff Marcus's wife. This photograph was taken 2 years ago, after Sheriff Marcus beat her so severely that she couldn't leave the house for weeks." The room erupted in gasps and shouts. Marcus jumped to his feet. "You can't prove I can prove everything." Alina pulled out more photographs, more documents, medical records, witness statements, police reports that were filed and then mysteriously disappeared. 23 years of evidence, all meticulously documented by my grandmother. She was a crazy old woman. Marcus shouted, his composure completely shattered. "No one will believe. I believe her." Sarah Chen stood again. "And I have evidence of my own." "So do I." Dr. Williams rose from her seat. "Patient records, x-rays, photographs of injuries that couldn't possibly be accidental." One by one, women throughout the room began to stand. Alina felt tears streaming down her face as she watched these brave souls finally find their voices. "This is a conspiracy," Judge Harrison declared. "A coordinated attack on our community's leadership." "It's not a conspiracy," Katie Morrison said, her young voice cutting through the chaos. "It's the truth. And we're not afraid to tell it anymore." Alina looked at this teenager who'd become the catalyst for everything, and felt a surge of love and admiration. Katie has been documenting current cases of abuse. Children and women who are being hurt right now. Today, while you men sit in your positions of power and do nothing. "You have no authority here," Mayor Thompson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Alina agreed, "but they do." The back doors of the room opened, and 3 people in dark suits entered. Alina recognized Agent Sarah Rodriguez from the FBI, whom Caleb had contacted through his military connections. "Sheriff Marcus Williams," Agent Rodriguez announced, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law." The room exploded into chaos. Marcus tried to run, but Agent Rodriguez's partners were ready. As they read him his rights, Alina felt a hand slip into hers. She looked down to see Katie standing beside her, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," Katie whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Alina corrected. "You and all the brave people who finally decided to speak up." As the FBI agents led Marcus away, Alina looked around the room at the faces of the people who'd found their courage. Dr. Williams was comforting a woman who'd been crying. Sarah Chen was organizing a group of teachers who were talking about finally being able to do their jobs properly. And throughout the room, women were embracing each other, sharing stories they'd kept hidden for years. But Alina's eyes kept returning to Caleb, who stood watching her, with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, certainly. Relief. But something else too, something that made her heart race. "Alina," he said quietly, moving closer. "You were incredible." "We were incredible," she corrected. "All of us." "Yes," he agreed. "But you were the catalyst. You were the one who was brave enough to speak first." Alina looked around the room at the community that was already beginning to heal. "My grandmother would be proud." "She would be," Caleb said. "But Alina, what? This is just the beginning. There will be trials, investigations, people who'll try to fight back. Are you ready for that?" Alina thought about the woman who'd arrived in Millbrook just weeks ago, broken, scared, running from her own failures. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who'd found her purpose in the most unlikely place. "I'm ready," she said. "As long as you're with me." Caleb's smile was soft and full of promise. "I'm not going anywhere." As the crowd began to disperse, Alina felt a sense of completion she'd never experienced before. She'd come to Millbrook looking for a place to hide, but instead she'd found something far more valuable, a community worth fighting for, a cause worth risking everything for, and a man who'd stood beside her through it all. The quiet man who'd told her to stay had become so much more than a protector. He'd become her partner in the truest sense of the word. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. Alina sat in the FBI's temporary field office, watching through the window as Agent Rodriguez interviewed another witness. It had been 3 weeks since the town council meeting, and the evidence kept mounting. What had started as a case against Sheriff Marcus had expanded into something much larger. Network of corruption that reached into every level of government. The mayors agreed to cooperate, Agent Rodriguez told Alina as she entered the room. He's providing information about the money trail in exchange for a reduced sentence. Alina nodded. feeling a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. How many people are we talking about? 14 arrests so far? We expect more. Agent Rodriguez sat down across from her. Alina, I want you to know that what you did here, what you all did, it's going to save lives. Not just in Millbrook, but in other communities where similar corruption exists. It wasn't just me, Alina said. The same response she'd given to every reporter, every investigator, every person who'd called her a hero. It was everyone who found the courage to speak up. Yes, but you were the spark. You were the one who showed them it was possible. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of communities destroyed by corruption. But I've never seen one fight back like this one did. Alina looked out the window again, watching the people of Millbrook going about their daily lives. The town looked the same, but everything had changed. Children walked to school without fear. Women spoke up in meetings. The silence that had suffocated the community for decades was finally broken. What happens now? Alina asked. Now we finish the job. The trials will start in a few months. It'll be a long process, but we have enough evidence to ensure convictions. Agent Rodriguez stood. And Alan, you should know that several other communities have reached out, places where similar corruption exists. They want to know how you did it. Alina felt a flutter of anxiety. I'm not a crusader. I'm just someone who couldn't stay quiet anymore. Sometimes that's all it takes. After Agent Rodriguez left, Alina drove to the cabin where Caleb was waiting. He'd been her anchor through everything. The interviews, the media attention, the threats from people who wanted to maintain the status quo. When the world felt overwhelming, he was the quiet center that kept her grounded. How did it go? He asked as she settled beside him on the porch. 14 arrests. More coming. Alina leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Rodriguez thinks we might have inspired other communities to speak up. How do you feel about that? Alina considered the question. Terrified, hopeful, proud, exhausted. She looked up at him. How do you feel about it? I feel like I'm watching you become the person you were always meant to be. Caleb's voice was soft. Strong, fearless, committed to justice. I'm not fearless, Alina protested. I'm scared every day. That's what makes you brave. Caleb turned to face her fully. Alina, there's something I need to tell you. The seriousness in his voice made her heart skip. What is it? I've been offered a job with the FBI. They want me to help with other cases like this. One communities where corruption has taken root, and people are afraid to speak up. He paused. The job would require travel. A lot of it. Alina felt her heart sink. You're leaving. I'm asking you to come with me. Caleb took her hands in his. As my partner, in work and in life. Alina stared at him, shocked. Caleb, I know it's a lot to ask. I know you've built a life here, made connections, started something important. But Alina, we work well together. We balance each other. And there are other communities out there that need what we can offer. What we can offer. Your courage and my connections. Your ability to inspire people and my knowledge of how these systems work. Caleb's grip on her hands tightened. Together, we could make a real difference. Alina looked out at the mountains that surrounded the cabin, thinking about the life she'd built in Millbrook. She'd come here broken and alone, but she'd found healing in the most unexpected ways. She'd found purpose, community, and love. What about Katie and the others? What about the people here who are just starting to heal? They'll be fine, Caleb said gently. They've found their voices. They don't need us to keep speaking for them. Alina knew he was right. Katie Morrison had already started a support group for teenage victims of abuse. Dr. Williams was implementing new protocols for reporting suspected abuse. Sarah Chen was running for mayor. The community was healing itself, growing stronger every day. There's something else, Caleb said quietly. Something I should have told you weeks ago. What? I love you, Alina. I've loved you since the night I saw you standing up to that mob, refusing to back down even when you were terrified. His voice was rough with emotion. You're the bravest person I've ever known, and I can't imagine facing the future without you. Alina felt tears streaming down her face. I love you too. I think I have since the moment you stepped between me and those men. Then come with me. Let's build something together. Let's help other communities find their voices, Alina thought. About her grandmother, who'd lived alone for 30 years, hiding the truth she'd discovered. Rosa Martinez had been brave in her own way, but she'd been isolated, afraid to act. Alina didn't have to make the same choice. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger. Yes, I'll come with you. Caleb's smile was brighter than the mountain sunrise. Are you sure? I'm sure. But first, we finish what we started here. We see the trials through. We make sure justice is done. Of course, as they sat on the porch, planning their future together, Alina felt her grandmother's presence one more time. Rosa Martinez had documented the truth, but hadn't lived to see justice done. Alina had not only exposed the corruption, but had found love, purpose, and a partner who shared her commitment to fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Caleb, Alina said, leaning into his embrace. What do you think my grandmother would say about all this? I think she'd say that you've honored her legacy in the most beautiful way possible. Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You've turned her silence into a voice that's going to echo for generations. Alina closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of love in equal measure. She'd come to Millbrook looking for a place to hide, but instead, she'd found her calling. She'd found her voice. And most importantly, she'd found her home not in a place, but in the quiet man who'd told her to stay, and who was now asking her to go with him on the greatest adventure of all. The fight for justice was just beginning, but Alina was no longer fighting alone. 6 months later, Alina stood in a courthouse in Montana, watching another corrupt sheriff being led away in handcuffs. The case had been remarkably similar to Millbrook's systematic abuse, cover-ups, and a community too frightened to speak up. But this time, Alina and Caleb had arrived with experience, with federal backing, and with a playbook that had been tested in the crucible of their own hometown. That's number 4, Caleb said quietly, joining her on the courthouse steps. 4 communities freed from corruption in 6 months. Alina nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. It's not enough. For every community we help, there are dozens more suffering in silence. We can't save everyone, Alina. I know. She turned to face him, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes that matched her own. But we can keep trying. Their relationship had deepened over the months of working together. They'd learned to read each other's moods, to provide support when the work became overwhelming, to celebrate the small victories and more in the cases they couldn't solve. They'd become true partners in every sense of the word. There's something I need to tell you, Caleb said, his voice serious. Rodriguez called this morning. There's been a development in the Millbrook case. Alina felt her heart skip. What kind of development? Judge Harrison died in prison last night. Heart attack. He was supposed to testify next week about the money trail, about who was funding the cover-ups. Alina closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of frustration. So we'll never know who was really behind it all. Maybe not. But Alina, it doesn't change what we accomplished. Marcus is serving 25 years. The mayor's in prison. 14 people in total were convicted. The system of corruption is broken. But the people who profited from it, who funded it, they're still out there. Yes, Caleb agreed. But they're not untouchable. We've proven that. Alina looked out at the mountains surrounding the Montana courthouse, thinking about the people they'd helped in this community. Maria Santos, who'd found the courage to leave her abusive husband. The teachers who could finally report suspected abuse without fear of retaliation. The children who were learning that their voices mattered. Rodriguez also said something else. Caleb continued. Katie Morrison has been accepted to law school. Full scholarship. Elena's face lit up. That's wonderful. She wants to specialize in civil rights law. She said she wants to help communities like Millbrook fight back against corruption. She's going to be amazing, Alina said, feeling a surge of pride for the teenager who'd become a catalyst for change. Rodriguez thinks we should consider training a team. Other people who could do what we do, help communities organize and fight back. Alina considered this. A network of people who specialize in exposing corruption. Exactly. We can't be everywhere, but we could train others. Share our methods, our contacts, our experience. That's a big responsibility. So was what we did in Millbrook, Caleb reminded her. And look how that turned out. Alina smiled, remembering the town they'd left behind. It wasn't perfect, no place ever was, but it was healing. People were talking to each other, supporting each other, building something better from the ashes of the old system. There's something else, Caleb said, his voice growing softer. Something personal. Alina turned to face him fully, seeing something new in his expression. What is it? I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I know we've only been together officially for 6 months, but I've known since that first night in Millbrook that you were the person I wanted to spend my life with. Elena's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. Caleb, I know we have a complicated life. I know we're always traveling, always fighting other people's battles. But I also know that I want you by my side. For all of it. He took her hand. Elena Martinez, will you marry me? Elena looked at this man who'd stood by her through everything, who'd helped her find her voice and her purpose, who'd shown her that love and justice could coexist. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. As Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena felt the same sense of completion she'd experienced in Millbrook. But this time, it was deeper, more personal. She wasn't just finding her purpose, she was choosing her future. I love you, she said, kissing him softly. I love the work we do together, the life we've built, the difference we make. I love you too, Caleb replied. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. They stood on the courthouse steps, holding each other as the sun set over the mountains. Around them, the people of this small Montana town were going home, to families that were safer because of the work Elena and Caleb had done. In a few weeks, they'd move on to the next community, the next case, the next group of people who needed their voices heard. But right now, in this moment, Elena felt the profound satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. She'd come so far from the broken woman who'd arrived in Millbrook frayed, alone, and running from her past. Now she was engaged to the man she loved, doing work that mattered, making a difference in the world. You know what I realized? Elena said, looking at the ring on her finger. What's that? My grandmother always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was action in spite of fear. But she was wrong about one thing. What she thought she had to carry the burden alone. She thought speaking up meant losing everything. Elena smiled. But speaking up is what brought us together. It's what gave us this life, this love, this purpose. She'd be proud of you, Caleb said softly. She'd be proud of us, Elena corrected. All of us. Everyone who found the courage to speak up, to fight back, to demand better. As they walked toward their rental car, Elena thought about the letter she'd received from Katie Morrison just that morning. The teenager had written about her plans for law school, about the support group she'd started, about the changes that were still happening in Millbrook. But the part that had meant the most to Elena was the ending. Thank you for showing us that we didn't have to accept the way things were. Thank you for proving that one person speaking up can change everything. And thank you for teaching us that love and justice aren't opposites, they're partners. Elena smiled, thinking about the communities they'd help, the people they'd meet, the battles they'd fight together. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be meaningful. And they wouldn't face it alone. The quiet man who'd told her to stay had become her partner in every sense of the word. And together, they were building something beautiful, a life dedicated to giving voice to the voiceless, power to the powerless, and hope to those who'd lost it. 5 years later, Elena stood in the same courthouse in Millbrook where it had all begun, but this time she was wearing a different role than of a witness in the final corruption trial. The courtroom was packed with familiar faces. Katie Morrison, now a third-year law student, sat in the front row, taking notes for her civil rights clinic. Dr. Williams was there, along with Sarah Chen, who'd been elected mayor 2 years earlier, and in the back, she could see some of the teenagers who'd been part of that first brave group of truth-tellers. Mrs. Stone, the prosecutor said, using Elena's married name, can you tell the court about the network that was established following the initial Millbrook investigation? Elena straightened, her voice clear and confident. The Millbrook model has been implemented in 47 communities across 12 states. We've documented over 300 cases of corruption, leading to 168 convictions, and the implementation of new oversight protocols in dozens of local governments. And this work continues. Yes, we now have a team of 32 investigators, attorneys, and community organizers. We provide training, resources, and support to communities that are dealing with systematic corruption. Elena caught Caleb's eye from the gallery. He smiled at her, and she felt the familiar warmth that had sustained them through 5 years of challenging work. Their marriage had been tested by the demands of their calling, but it had only grown stronger. Mrs. Stone, in your professional opinion, what was the key to success in Millbrook? Elena thought about the question, remembering that first night when she'd stood face to face with an angry mob, terrified and alone. The key was realizing that we weren't alone, that there were others who wanted change, who were willing to fight for it. My grandmother had all the evidence needed to expose the corruption, but she tried to carry the burden by herself. We succeeded because we carried it together. After the trial, Elena and Caleb walked through the streets of Millbrook, amazed at how much the town had changed. The old sheriff's station had been converted into a community center. The courthouse steps, where Alina had first seen evidence of the town's corruption, now hosted a weekly farmers market. Children played in parks that had been rebuilt, with funds recovered from the corruption investigation. It's hard to believe. It's the same place, Caleb said, stopping in front of Rosa Martinez's old house. Alina smiled. They'd donated the house to the town, and it had been converted into a shelter for domestic violence victims. A small plaque by the door read, "Rosa Martinez House, a safe haven for those who need to speak their truth." She would have loved that, Alina said, touching the plaque gently. She would have loved all of it, Caleb agreed. But most of all, she would have loved seeing you become the person you were meant to be. Alina looked at her husband, this quiet man who'd stood by her through everything. We've built something good here, haven't we? We've built something incredible. Not just here, but everywhere we've worked. Caleb took her hand. Alina, there's something I need to tell you. Alina felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. What is it? Rodriguez called this morning. She's retiring from the bureau, and she wants to recommend us for a special recognition. The Attorney General's Award for Excellence in Community Service. Alina stared at him. That's a huge honor. It is, but that's not the important part. Caleb's grip on her hand tightened. The important part is that she wants us to consider taking over her position, heading up a new federal task force on community corruption. A task force, Alina. We could institutionalize everything we've learned, make it official federal policy, train FBI agents in community organizing, create a permanent structure for helping communities fight back against corruption. Alina considered this, feeling the weight of possibility. It would mean moving to Washington. It would mean changing everything about how we work. But Alina, think about the reach we'd have, the resources, the ability to help communities before the corruption takes root, not just after. Alina looked around at the town that had become her second home, thinking about all the communities they'd helped, all the people who'd found their voices because of their work. What do you think? I think your grandmother would want us to do whatever helps the most people. And I think this could help a lot of people. There's something else to consider, Alina said, smiling. Something I haven't told you yet. What's that? I'm pregnant. Caleb's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, and finally, pure happiness. Alina, that's when did you? How long have you known? 2 weeks. I wanted to wait until after the trial to tell you. Alina placed a hand on her still flat stomach. I know it complicates things. It doesn't complicate things, Caleb said firmly. It perfects them. He pulled her into his arms, spinning her around on the sidewalk in front of her grandmother's house. Alina laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. So what do we do? She asked when he set her down. Take the federal position, or keep doing what we're doing. We do what we've always done, Caleb said. We make the choice that helps the most people. And we make it together. Alina looked at the Rosa Martinez house, thinking about her grandmother's legacy. Rosa had lived quietly, helped people secretly, and died without seeing the corruption she'd documented finally exposed. But her granddaughter had taken that hidden truth and turned it into something powerful, something that had changed not just one community but dozens. I have an idea, Alina said slowly. What if we take the federal position but we do it differently? What if we create a hybrid model, some people working within the system, some people working in communities, all of them connected? A network, Caleb said, understanding immediately. Like what we've built, but with federal resources and authority. Exactly. We could have Katie and people like her working in communities, while we work in Washington to change policy. We could create a pipeline from grassroots organizing to federal action. Caleb's smile was slow and full of admiration. You're brilliant, you know that. I'm practical, Alina corrected. I've learned that the best way to change systems is to work both inside and outside them. As they walked back to their car, Alina felt the familiar sense of possibility that had sustained her through 5 years of difficult work. She was going to be a mother, raising a child in a world where she and Caleb were actively fighting to make things better. She was going to help shape federal policy on corruption and community organizing. And she was going to do it all with the man who'd told her to stay when everyone else had told her to leave. You know what the best part of all this is? Alina said as they drove out of Millbrook. What's that? My grandmother started this with the belief that one person speaking up could make a difference. We've proven that it can. But we've also proven that when people speak up together, they can change everything. And now we're going to make sure they have the tools and support to do it. Caleb added. Alina placed her hand over her stomach, thinking, About the child who would grow up in a world where corruption was fought systematically, where communities had resources to organize, where speaking truth to power was supported by federal policy. "I wish my grandmother could see this," she said softly. "Maybe she can," Caleb replied. "Maybe she's been watching all along, seeing her courage multiply into something she never imagined possible." Alina smiled, thinking about Rosa Martinez, woman who'd lived quietly but dreamed of justice, who'd documented truth but never lived to see it acted upon, who'd planted seeds of resistance that had grown into a movement. The quiet man had told her to stay, and in staying, Alina had found not just love, but purpose. She'd found not just a home, but a calling, and together, they'd built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of courage that would inspire communities for generations to come. As they drove toward their future, Alina felt the profound satisfaction of a life lived with intention. She'd come to Millbrook, broken and alone, but she was leaving it strong and surrounded by love. She'd arrived running from her past, but she was departing ready to shape the future. The woman who'd been told to leave town had instead chosen to stay and fight. And in fighting, she'd discovered that love and justice weren't just compatible, they were inseparable. They were the twin forces that had the power to change everything. In the end, that was Rosa Martinez's greatest gift to her granddaughter. The understanding that courage wasn't something you found, it was something you chose. Again and again, in the face of fear. And when you chose it together with someone who loved you, it became something unstoppable. The quiet man who'd said "stay with me" had become her partner in building a better world. And their love story had become something bigger than either of them had imagined, a testament to the power of speaking truth, fighting injustice, and choosing love over fear. As they drove into the sunset, Alina Martinez Stone knew that this wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The beginning of a federal task force that would help communities across America find their voices. The beginning of a family that would be raised on the values of justice and compassion. The beginning of a legacy that would honor Rosa Martinez's courage by multiplying it. ATHOUSANDFOLD. They had told her to leave town, but she had stayed, and in staying, she had learned that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to be silenced. Sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to fight for a better world, together. The quiet man had asked her to stay with him, and she had. Now they were building something beautiful together, a life, a family, a movement that would echo through generations. And it had all started with a simple choice: to speak up instead of staying silent, to fight instead of fleeing, to love instead of leaving. In the end, that was the most powerful truth of all.